we all know that this conservative, 6-3 conservative Supreme Court is not a friend to voting rights. And we can't celebrate too much and overplay what happened today. Voting rights didn't make gains, but we prevented some really important setbacks and essentially preserve the status quo. And we know with this particular Supreme Court, if you can preserve the status quo, that is a win, because again, this has not been a friendly court to voting rights. And I'm talking about this blockbuster decision today. This is a case that came out of North Carolina where the state Supreme Court in that state had initially struck down election maps drawn by Republican lawmakers, saying those maps were overly partisan. The GOP lawmakers then asked the U.S. Supreme Court to adopt, and this is a theory came up, one of Trump's lawyers came up with this theory, known as the independent state legislature theory, and a rule that the state justices on the Supreme Court of that state, lack the power to even consider the maps. The argument was that the U.S. Constitution says election issues should be left to legislatures. Professor Walker, tell us how huge this case is and what might the ramifications have been had the court voted or had there been an order by this court in favor of those GOP lawmakers.
It was an important decision. I think it called maintaining at least the status quo. But I'm going to tell you what I find very interesting about this decision and the theory ISL you just described. We're essentially using that theory to dismantle democracy in the United States, where at the same time people arguing that CRT is the evil monster in the closet. So I wanted to highlight that in terms of the ultimate contradiction in those two concepts or ideas. It's critically important, particularly, like I said, Areva, you know well, in terms of Shelby County versus Holder, in terms of the damage they did to the Voting Rights Act, particularly Section 5. So we've been fighting this, swimming uphill on these issues relating to voting rights and upholding their democracy. So it's almost like we kind of hold they're in a whole position. And this is important for 2024, because I got to tell you, Areva, that this decision had come out on the opposite side. I don't know how much longer we would have a fair democracy, and many of us describe, because you talked about in terms of a lot of with these supermajorities, let's call them what they are, these Republican supermajorities, my state of Florida, among others, and what they're trying to do in terms of making sure that they permanently hold control of what happens at the state level, don't want to be held responsible. And then we also talk about dismantling of the Voting Rights Act. So all this comes into play. And what I want people to understand, this is purposeful. As I talked about my experience working on Capitol Hill, and I can tell you for years, my Republican colleagues have talked about doing exactly what we saw happen over the last year and a half. Not only voting rights, but also women's reproductive rights. So it's really important to understand that we dodged a bullet, but as you well know, it's not over. Today we celebrate, but we still have the affirmative action decision coming tomorrow, and we also have the student loan decision coming tomorrow. Or Thursday.
Yeah, you're so right. We definitely dodged a really, really big and powerful bullet, because essentially this ruling, if it had been the other way, in a state like yours in Florida, if Donald Trump had lost the state, if Joe Biden beat him fair and square, and he didn't like the results, he literally could have gone to the state legislature, that supermajority in Florida that you're talking about, made an appeal to them, and they could have changed the outcome of the election and said, no, people, it doesn't matter that you voted for Joe Biden. We, the supermajority Republicans in the Florida State House, are going to determine that our guy, Donald Trump, is the winner of our state. And guess what? You don't get to go to court. You don't get to appeal our decision to anyone. And also, I think it's important to note, Ray, if the Republican lawmakers had their way, that would have been the same with respect to how they draw maps. They said, basically, we should get to redistrict, we should get to gerrymander, we should get to do whatever we want to do, dismantle all Black voting districts, and then say to those that would dare to complain, you have no rights to go into court, state courts or federal courts, because we, the supermajority in the state legislature, are the only ones that get to decide what these maps should look like. Do you think that this was just a bridge too far? I mean, when you think about the power that they were asking the Supreme Court to give to these supermajorities, it's mind-boggling.
It is, and you're exactly right. They could have achieved what Mike Pence stop them from doing, which is they could have sent their own slates of electors to Washington to vote for president. But there's two other decisions in the last few days in Louisiana and Alabama, also unexpected, where the court came down on the side of voting rights activists. Now, look, I'm so used to bad news from the Supreme Court that I don't know how to handle good news. So I'd like to have a theory, but my theories probably never work. But one is, this is the outgrowth of people's realization of what John Roberts led regarding the Voting Rights Act. That is something that has a stain on the Supreme Court and on him personally that has to sting. A second one is the Dobbs decision. Roberts warned his colleagues that their politics was going to be in a terrible situation. He turned out to be right. And the third is that some of the justices who he thinks put the court in that position are the ones who are in the middle of the corruption investigations about billionaires. Or as one columnist said, why don't we dispense with the fiction and just have them sponsor Supreme Court justices and have them wear uniforms in their name? So there's an overlap between the people Roberts and Kavanaugh seem to be trying to marginalize a bit are also highly vulnerable now, because they're answering charges, especially Alito and Thomas, about their behavior and the people who support them. So there's weird stuff happening there. I wish I could figure this one out. And after that, we can figure out Russia,
Yeah, I'm with you on that last theory. And I'll take that theory that you just articulated and expand it, because I think, as we see oftentimes by either political party, you can go so far. We saw the backlash with Democrats after George Floyd's murder, when we start hearing talk about defunding the police. That language incensed people, including progressives and liberals, and we saw a backlash. Mm-hmm. And I think the overturning of Roe v. Wade has been a catalyst for a similar backlash. We saw those Republicans those conservative jurists, sit before those Senate Judiciary Committees and tell a big lie that they respected precedent, that they were not going to overturn Roe v. Wade. And then the moment they had an opportunity to do so, they overturned it. And we saw women all over this country just push back. We saw men standing in solidarity. We saw people saying, even Republicans and conservatives, this is too far. Force 12-year-old girls who've been raped by their fathers to carry a baby, all in the name of being a pro-lifer. Force women in southern states to have to travel across the country to try to get an abortion to save their lives. Literally, force women to carry pregnancies, Black women in Mississippi, even if it means it kills the woman. So I think what we're seeing is a response, and you're right, I think Justice Roberts, who's sometimes reasonable, saying, I can't have these two corrupt justices, and he knows they're corrupt, yacht trips and $1,000 fishing lodge, accommodations, private jets, etc. He knows that that's far outside the bounds of what any Supreme Court justice should be paying for your mama's house and your kids' college tuition. It's just ridiculous. So I think the Republicans have played their hands so far and have become so extreme in their efforts to undo our democracy that even some of the folks who we thought would be ultra conservative on the court are saying this is too far, and they don't want the taint of being in an opinion with Alito and Clarence Thomas. Boy, if we were flies on the wall, we'd see maybe they've already put them in a timeout section. We don't want the taint. Can you imagine Ketanji Brown Jackson, having to have lunch with Clarence Thomas, facing him and dealing with just all of the ironies associated with that. So whatever it is, we'll take it. We'll take this gift today. We will celebrate, as you said, Dr. Walker, today, and we will remain vigilant, because even though we may have won a battle, we definitely have not won the war.